Well, hi, everybody. I'm Dick Flavin, the Poet Laureate of the Red Sox, and we want to welcome you to this Zoom session of the Great Fenway Park Writers Series, excuse me. This is the fourth Zoom session that we've had. Of course, the Writers Series has been in existence for 17 years now. For the great amount of that time under our late friend and dear associate, George Mitrovich. We are now doing the Zoom sessions. We've had 3 of them thus far. I can show you what we've had. We've had 24, Willie Mays book by John Shea. We've had a great Celtics book, The Last Pass by Gary Pomerantz. And in August, we did The Swing Kings, about the home run revolution in baseball by Jared Diamond of the Wall Street Journal. And this month we have something that's really fantastic, The Intangibles, Unlocking the Science and the Soul of Team Chemistry. And this book, I can tell you, has put me into a poetic mood, which I'm going to share with you, whether you like it or not. What is clubhouse chemistry? That's a gosh darn mystery. Is it the way teams interact, or is it, I'm having trouble reading my writing here. Is it the way teams interact? Is it fiction? Is it fact? Do players have to like each other and treat each other like a brother? Does it protect them like a shield? And does it matter on the field? Is it more or less than it would seem in the makeup of a team? Intangibles, there's no denying. And the author is Joan Ryan.
Bravo, Dick.
And with that, I will turn the proceedings over to our interlocutor for the evening, baseball writer par excellence, historian of note, and all-around good guy, Gordon Eads. Gordon, take it away.
Dick, thank you very much. And Joni, if there's one thing we share in common with Dick, the experience of not being able to read our own writing at times, as ink-stained wretches who have shared press boxes over the past years. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us to our latest edition of Great Fenway Park Writers Series. For those of you who don't know me, as Dick said, my name is Gordon Eads. Until recently, I was the historian for the Boston Red Sox. The Red Sox are still making history, at least Mookie is, but they are now doing so without me. I am now working as a freelance journalist, but the Great Fenway Park Writers Series is still going on. And we're delighted that you're joining us, and I am more than delighted that our special guest this evening, and I'm going to ask Mr. Flavin to turn off his video. As much as we love to gaze at him, we're going to, there he goes. He turned off, there he goes. And our guest tonight is a longtime colleague of mine, the great Joan Ryan, an acclaimed journalist. Worked for many years at the San Francisco Chronicle. Dick just can't stay away. That's a hoot. Joni is the author of 5 books, including Little Girls in Pretty Boxes, which was about the young women who compete in gymnastics and swimming. And that book was named one of the top 100 sports books of all time by Sports Illustrated. Bravo, Joan. I wish she had written Intangibles years ago, because I think it would have informed my coverage of teams that I've covered over the years. But we're glad that she has now added it to the literature of our time. And Joan, let's welcome, but let's jump right into it.
Thanks.
What is it that set you on this quest?
Well, one moment in particular, and you know how that sometimes happens, Gordon. Something gets a hold of you and you can't let it go. And so that was certainly the case with this book about team chemistry. And it sort of goes all the way back to 1989 when I was sort of a youngish sports writer and was a columnist in San Francisco. And this 1989 San Francisco Giants team just captivated me. It was this, there were so many factions on that team that you would think that it could never really work. Nobody predicted they would get into the postseason, certainly not get to the World Series, but they did. And it was this team of Southern whites and African Americans and Latin players from 3 different countries, functional illiterates and college guys, you know, these young kids coming up and the veterans just holding on, you know, for dear life for the final season. And somehow they just, you know, they fought, all the rest of it, but you could see that they loved each other. And now 20 years later, I'm no longer a sports writer. I'm writing books and working as the media consultant for the San Francisco Giants. And that 89 team had their 20th reunion and then big party tent. And they came from Horsehead, New York and Havasu, Arizona. And they almost all showed up for this thing. And I'm walking through that tent, catching up. And I could hear it in their voices and see it in their eyes. They still loved each other. And this was sort of in the heyday of Moneyball. And I'm driving home and I loved Moneyball, big fan of analytics, but I'm driving home from that party and I'm thinking, I don't know, there's something going on there that maybe can't be measured. I don't know, but there was something. And so I set out to answer 3 questions. I was totally curious about this. Like, does chemistry really exist? And of course, you know, all the skeptics, the Billy Beans and the Michael Lewis's just like, no, it doesn't exist. It's something we make up to explain an underdog that wins. If it exists, what is it exactly? And then how does it affect performance? Because why even talk about it unless it affects performance? And so 10 years, 150 interviews, read 62 books and countless research papers, I finally published Intangibles.
So a 10-year deadline is a little bit different from the 45-minute deadlines you used to face on a nightly basis when you work.
I prefer the 45 minutes.
there you go. So let's cut to the chase. Is there such a thing as team chemistry? And if so, how do you define it?
There's absolutely team chemistry. And I always sense that. And I think most people who have played on a good team, you know, whether it was Little League, college, or otherwise, or even worked in a really healthy workplace culture, we know it exists. We just don't necessarily know what it is. And so what I found in all my research is that tribalism is the most deeply rooted human behavior. And that is at the core of team chemistry. And so one of the things I studied was evolutionary biology, right? Find out that our over 3 million years of evolution, our brains quadrupled in size. Now, why did they keep growing so big? And they're really large in proportion to our bodies when we compare ourselves to, you know, every other creature on Earth. And you would think that they grew to accommodate all of our intellectual wiring, but it was mostly the social wiring. We are experts in social and emotional connection. We can read each other's faces. You know, we see, you know, just this fleeting twitch of a facial muscle, and our brains totally comprehend that, read what that might mean. We recalibrate how we're going to, you know, if I'm looking at your face right now and I say, you're sort of smiling, God, what the heck's she talking about? You know, whatever. Then I take that in and I recalibrate what's now on my face and my tone of voice and my body language. So, you know, and this happened obviously because we needed to be in tribes. We needed to be so connected with each other in order to survive. And we had to create bonds so strong that we'd be willing to sacrifice ourselves for the good of the tribe. And a version of this plays out in team. We are creatures that are all about relationship. In fact, one of the neuroscientists that I talked to, he was trying to explain to me, or he kind of, he said, explain to me how profoundly we affect each other. He said, there's some people you just feel funnier with, or there's people that you're just kind of sharper with. And I said, oh yeah, what's that about? And he said, is that in me? And they're just tapping into something already in me. And he said, he kind of looked at me and he said, there is no you. There is only you in relationship. And I was like, okay, I got to wrap my brain around that. But he said, a part of who you are in the moment comes from who the other person is. So in other words, every meaningful interaction you have with a human being changes both humans. And that's what's happening on a team.
So Joni, let's tell a story. One on the face of it should be familiar to the Red Sox fans in our audience, but with a twist that you uncovered that has never been told. Game 4, 2013 World Series. The Red Sox are in St. Louis. They're down 2-1. The manager, John Farrell, has posted his lineup for the game. He's got Daniel Nava in left field. He's got Shane Victorino in right. But before the game, a group of Sox veterans, a group that included Big Papi, David Ortiz, Johnny Lester, who was the ace of that team, and Dustin Pedroia, who often has been considered, described as the heartbeat of that team, went into Farrell's office and demanded that he change the lineup. They asked that Jonny Gomes be put in the starting lineup, even though Gomes, up to that point, was hitless in the World Series and had done little in the postseason. Farrell changes his lineup, takes Victorino out. They said he had a leg injury. He's scratched. Gomes hits a 3-run home run that decides that game. You describe Gomes in your book as something you call a super carrier, a player that carries more than his share of team chemistry. Jake Peavy, who pitched on that team, said that Gomes was the best team chemistry player that he ever played with. Now, you went beyond the anecdotal evidence. You went to Josh Woolley, a neuroscientist at UC San Francisco, and asked him whether there was neurological evidence for Gomes' impact on his teammates. What was his answer?
Well, yeah, because I said to him, okay, what was really going on? Where's the science here? Because this is a science-based book. And I said, couldn't it be that, his teammates just believed he made them better, but he didn't really make them better? And he said, he found my question kind of confusing. He said, well, why do we continually question the truth of our own experiences? And he asked me, he said, did Gomes's teammates perform better? And I said, well, yeah. He said, and did they win? I said, well, yeah. And he said, the actual experience is the real evidence. And I said, yeah, but they just believed it. So he said, yes, their belief did improve their performance. And he said, in medicine, when a patient believes that a pill will ease her pain, it often does, even if it's no matter what's really in the pill, right? And it's because our belief that it will do that activates that pain relief center in our brain. So a team's belief in a particular player has a similar biological effect. So Dr. Woolley just, because I'm kind of looking, and he said, this is a real phenomenon. It's in the brain. It's a real thing. It happens. It affects performance. And you know what that got me thinking of, Gordon? It got me thinking about the yips, right? We think of the yips, in golf, and, suddenly a golfer can't putt. And we've seen it in baseball, pitchers who can't get the ball over the plate or can't even throw to first base. Steve Sachs, there are several others. And I found it interesting that, the same people who dismiss team chemistry and dismiss that a belief in a player can elevate performance believe in the yips. It's like, well, if you believe that the yips are real, that it's psychological, but it actually expresses itself physically, why can't they believe the opposite is true, that a belief can elevate performance as well?
So sometimes, a scientist has a more detailed explanation, but basically what he was telling you is sometimes you do have to believe your lying eyes, that the anecdotal evidence is sufficient. And, the players said, and I think it was Dustin Pedroia who told you this, you know what, if we're going to lose, we want to go down with our guys. And yes, Gomes hit $1.50 or thereabouts for that entire postseason. Yet the players pointed out another statistic. They were 10-1 in games in which Jonny Gomes started.
Exactly. And
right?
that's what makes him a super carrier. And, we all know them. They're the people who walk into a room and the energy just sort of changes. It's almost palpable. And it's, you mentioned Jake Peavy in relation to Gomes, and Jake Peavy explained the impact of players on each other. And Jonny Gomes, is the best example. But if you've ever seen Jake Peavy pitch, right? He's the stomper and the snorter, and he's given 100%, it's just with such ferocity. And so I asked him, I said, why does team chemistry matter to you? You don't need anything to help your performance. You're already giving 100%. And he gave me the best line in the book. He said, my teammates bring out a fight in me I can't willingly summon for myself. And that's it. That is team chemistry in a nutshell.
Very cool. Before I go to my next question, I will alert the audience to the fact that there is a Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. If you have a question, we're going to devote the last 15 or 20 minutes to your questions. But, Joan, while we're talking science, let's stay with the science.
Okay.
What is oxytocin and what is its effect on team chemistry?
Well, oxytocin is this hormone neuropeptide in our brain. And it's called, some people call it the trust hormone or the love hormone. And it floods our brains and goes into our blood system when we fall in love, or, it happens to a woman who's in labor. And it also happens to all of us, every day when someone shows us trust or shows us true acceptance, our brain releases this oxytocin. And when it goes through our blood system, we feel trust in return. We feel more bonded to that person. We feel trustworthy because they have shown us trust. They have shown us acceptance. Now, what's sort of interesting is that we also have these mirror neurons. And I thought about this, and it kind of goes back to how we mimic each other. That's how we understand what, somebody else's mindset is, what is their emotions. We have these mirror neurons. And what's really interesting is that, let's say, I'm making it up, but you're in a clubhouse, baseball clubhouse, and I'm going to use my Giants as example. But let's say Buster Posey, the star veteran, welcomes the newest rookie who's coming in mid-season, maybe September call-ups or whatever. And he goes over to that guy and he says to this kid, hey, puts his arm around him and says, hey, you're just the guy we need right now for this team. You're here, you're ready to go. Read all about you in the minor leagues. Hey, you've got it going and I believe in you. And he's got his arm around him. Now, the kid across the clubhouse is watching this, right? So his mirror neurons are firing, and his mirror neurons then is allowing him to basically feel what that rookie is feeling, as if Buster Posey is doing that to him. And now his brain releases oxytocin, and he's feeling this bond also to Buster Posey, and he's feeling he's trusted and accepted. And it got me like visualizing all of this going around in these clubhouses where you can see everybody. So all of these small and large gestures are landing somewhere with someone in that clubhouse. And if you have a healthy clubhouse, it's all these healthy feelings that are going around and changing how you participate in that team. And if it's an unhealthy clubhouse, all the complainers and the malingerers, just have, it's free reign for all of that to spread too.
So there is literally a chemical component to team chemistry. Imagine
Absolutely.
that.
Absolutely.
So, just as you described super carriers like Jonny Gomes, you also, there's a category you call super disruptors, players who can almost single-handedly ruin a team's chemistry. Now, from afar, and we'll talk about one of your San Francisco Giants, I think there was a presumption that Barry Bonds would be an obvious candidate to be a super disruptor. I mean, this is a guy who was arrogant, aloof. He had 4 lockers for his own personal use. He had a massage chair. He had his own, posse. You would think that, and he seldom bothered to stretch with his teammates, which is an absolute prerequisite for most major league ball clubs. Everybody stretches. And yet, to your surprise, I think, you discovered that Bonds was not a disruptor, and you introduced something you call task chemistry. What is that?
Yeah, Bonds, especially, well, I was looking at Barry Bonds, who was, number 1 on everybody's hit list, right, for being a super disruptor. And not far below that was Jeff Kent, the second baseman for 7 years with Bonds at the Giants when they went to the 2002 World Series. And you would think, I mean, you can barely deal with one of them. Now you've got 2. I mean, if there's a recipe for disaster, that ought to be it. But it wasn't. That team performed really, really well. And when I interviewed their teammates for this, because I assumed he was a super disruptor. So just as I had a whole chapter on Jonny Gomes, my plan was to have a whole chapter on Barry Bonds as super disruptor. And, it just totally flipped. And, as a journalist, that's really exciting, actually, when you have an assumption about something and you do your reporting and you realize, oh, wait a minute, that's not true. Now let's figure out, well, why wasn't that true? Because Bonds and Kent truly disliked each other. I mean, they were on different sides of the clubhouse, glowering at each other if they looked at each other at all, never spoke. Yet they played, their team played so well. And what I came to understand was that there's different kinds of chemistry and there's different kinds of trust. And I know 2 types of chemistry, and there's probably more than that, but there's the social emotional chemistry, which most human beings need in order to elevate their performance. But people like Bonds and Kent didn't need that. And what they had was task chemistry. They completely trusted each other on the field. They knew that the other guy was as committed and worked as hard in his craft as he did. And when I interviewed both of them, and I had long, fabulous, wonderful interviews with both of them, just fascinating, because they're both
Let me
super
interrupt you right there, Joni. That in itself was a major accomplishment.
Yeah.
You guys who are regarded by many in the media as total SOBs, you got them to open, both of them to open up and have these wonderful conversations with you.
Well, it took me a year with Bonds of building trust. I mean, trust is all through this book, all through my interviews. It's all about building trust, right? And then you can get people, people will open up to you, but they need to trust you. But anyway, you get onto this task chemistry. And when I interviewed each one of them, Bond started talking negatively, about somebody he didn't say the name of. And I said, oh, are you talking about Jeff Kent? And he looked at me like, Jeff Kent? Nobody else I want on the field with me more than I want Jeff Kent. He's the guy I want at second base every single day. And when I talked to Jeff Kent, he said exactly the same thing about Barry Bonds. Right. And it was a real revelation to me that there are many different ways to have trust and to have chemistry.
So, as you referenced earlier, Joan, in this age of Moneyball statistical analysis, the whole idea of team chemistry struck many as, old-fashioned, quaint, maybe obsolete. And among those skeptics was another guy very familiar to a Boston audience, Theo Epstein. Theo actually said he once looked at players as assets, statistics on a spreadsheet. He looked at teams as portfolios.
Yeah.
But his views evolved. How so?
Well, he's a smart guy. And most of the really smart people evolve. They allow themselves to learn. They allow themselves to question their assumptions. And what always struck me and still does about people who are just analytics, and totally dismiss team chemistry. And it's what Theo Epstein came to understand when in 2016, was it 2016, 2015, when the Cubs won?
2016, yeah.
2016, when the Cubs won, he had, his own revelations that, you can put together the most brilliant strategy in the world with all what Bruce Bochy, the former Giants manager, would call the propeller heads in the front office. Those guys come up to, the most brilliant strategies and forget that actual human beings have to carry out your strategy. So Theo Epstein that year in 2016 delivered just one of the most beautiful commencement speeches at his alma mater, Yale. And he said this was what he had learned. And this is quoting from his commencement speech. The truth is that a player's character matters. The heartbeat matters. Fears and aspirations matter. The player's impact on others matters. The willingness to connect matters. Who you are, how you live among others, all that matters. And to me, that meant that his shift in thinking wasn't about questioning the usefulness of analytics. I mean, analytics are essential. And teams are right still to stock their front offices with mathematical wizards who can, because what the analytics does is unearth the weaknesses of your rivals and detect your own. But businesses and organizations that rely too heavily on analytics risk undermining the performances they're trying to elevate. So overusing statistics is as problematic as not using them at all. And perhaps we saw that in Game 6 with the Rays in the World Series, right?
Kevin Cash should have read page 224 of your book, Joan. Tell us. What did you write?
Well, I don't have it in front of me, Gordon. Do you?
I'll tell you what you wrote.
Okay.
What Jonny wrote was that, those who rely so much on analytics, one example she gave is like, for example, not wanting a starting pitcher to face a lineup the third time through the order. Now, does that sound familiar? That's Game 6. Kevin Cash. He had Blake Snell absolutely dealing in that game. And the top of the Dodger lineup was coming up. Betts Seager and Justin Turner. Up to that point in the game, they had 6 at-bats. Snell had 6 strikeouts in facing those 3 guys. But when the number 9 hitter in the Dodger lineup got a base hit and Mookie was coming to the plate, Kevin Cash, relying on the analytics, went and took Snell out of the game. And those of you who watched saw what happened. The magnitude of Mookie, he gets a double, a wild pitch scores a tying run. Mookie with a daring gambit, beating a throw to the plate on an infield grounder for the second run. Sometimes there's the over-reliance on stats rather than taking a measure of a player's heart in that moment. And Blake Snell was totally in the zone in that game.
Totally in control. And it goes back to what we said earlier with Dr. Woolley, Josh Woolley, the neuroscientist, said, the evidence is your own eyes.
There it is.
That's scientific evidence. I mean, somebody once said that science is like a triumph of common sense, right? It's logic. And why we don't trust what we see. And that's how analytics can fragilize a team. That we don't challenge ourselves because the analytics keep telling us we're not capable of. And you know what? Human beings surprise us at every turn.
You know, Joni, maybe my favorite chapter in your book was entitled Just Us. And maybe it's because it's a story that I wasn't really familiar with. Certainly, I didn't know the details of it. Tells the story of the 1996 women's Olympic basketball team coached by the legendary Stanford coach, Tara VanDerveer.
Tara VanDerveer.
Oh, I said, yeah, excuse me. Tara. And someone that you know well, obviously I don't, I just called her Trish. But in the run-up to the Olympics, VanDerveer, who had been humiliated by a one-sided loss to Brazil in 1994 in the World Championships, the FIBA World Championship, she put her team through hell. I mean, 2-a-day practices, a travel schedule that had to be created by a masochist, constant haranguing at mistakes, running drills until her players dropped. But you quote a neuroeconomist named Paul Zak, who said that by creating stress and isolation, VanDerveer formed a blueprint for bringing her team together. The Golden State Warriors, the great championship teams of this last decade, during their run of dominance, called that feeling Just Us. So tell us about that Olympic team and how a commitment to a quest turned into a commitment to each other.
It's really the military model. And I don't know if Tara was using the military model. I think, she comes by being very, very hard on her players, quite honestly. But, it's the whole reason there's boot camp, right? You make it really high stress, really difficult, because guess what? That bonds those guys together. They're on an island on their own. They're just us. All they can rely on is each other. And that is what prepares them for battle, right? That's what allows them to perform. And we think okay, that women's team in 1996, their goal and their supposed purpose was to win the gold medal. And that's what they wanted to do. And they were all these individual contractors. They had all played over in Europe, big stars over there. And now they all have to come together and play as a team. And they really weren't. And they certainly weren't socializing with each other. They all returned to their own rooms because they each took a year out of their lives to get ready for this. And they're in Siberia and Kazakhstan and Beijing and all these places. And over time, they did come together because of the hardship and because of their isolation. They had to count on each other. And again, just like in the military, that, you think maybe you enlist for God and country, but when you're out on the battlefield, the only thing that can keep you, number one, from running off the battlefield, and what allows you to perform at your highest level under almost unbearable stress, is purpose much closer at hand, which is the guy next to you. And any soldier, say again?
I was just going to say, Joan, you actually, you didn't just cite military model as an example. You went and talked to General Stanley McChrystal, who commanded the joint US-NATO mission in Afghanistan. And he also was in charge of the Department of Defense's Black Ops that took out Saddam Hussein, captured Saddam, and ultimately killed al-Zarqawi, the al-Qaeda leader. McChrystal's in private business now, but he talked to you, and this is the same thing really that happened to the U.S. women's team. He talked to you about the power of bonding. What did he mean by that?
Well, he talked about SEAL teams, and he said that this is why SEAL teams train the way they do, that there is as much emphasis on bonding and trust as there is on physical fitness and technical skills. And for example, they do this thing called the basic underwater demolition course, and each trainee is assigned a swim buddy, and they have to go everywhere together, dining hall everywhere. And if you're caught without your swim buddy another trainee is punished at random for allowing it to happen. And what McChrystal says is without that kind of training, with such emphasis on trust and bonding, those SEAL teams would just be a bunch of fit soldiers, but they're not. They are an elite squad that performs at the highest level, and they totally will sacrifice themselves for the other one.
And that's remarkable. And that's
It is. And McChrystal too, in his office, you know, he has this tiny little office. There's like I don't know how many people, you know, it's in beautiful Alexandria, Virginia. And he's in this tiny glass office that he sits in. And I could tell he was sitting in there and I'm talking to him and he's like counting the minutes until he can get out of that office. You could tell he didn't spend a whole lot of time in there. He usually parks his chair in the workplace, which has no walls, and it's between this beautiful kitchen where there's room for people to sit and have their lunch, and their workstations. And he parks his chair right there, so everybody going from the kitchen to the workplace and back again has to go by him, and they have a chat, they talk about things, they catch up, and that's his way of staying connected to his team and creating a team among the workers themselves.
So another name that's familiar here, David Ross, backup catcher on the 2013 World Series champions, was described in one study as the epitome of where advanced metrics and player intangibles are at odds. I mean, Rossi was never more than a backup catcher throughout his career. I mean, he lasted, more than a decade. But I think he was a starter only 1 year in his career. And yet he won World Series with both the Sox in 2013. And it's hard to imagine, but he actually may have been even more beloved in Chicago, where they called him Grandpa Rossi, wins another World Series in 2016. And it seemed wherever he played, his teams seemed to play better than what the statistics would have suggested. Now, Ross fit the definition of one of 7 archetypes that you identify, that you say every good chemistry team had. So tell us what it meant to be the sage, as Rossi was, and what are the other archetypes you describe?
Oh, sure. And David Ross was also a super carrier. And a super carrier often embodies like most or all 7 archetypes. But the sage is the grandpa. The sage is that veteran who has seen it all, done it all, and like the best grandpas, has no judgment. They're not going to say, man, you screwed up. They're going to say, come on, sit next to me. Let me tell you, this is going to happen to you 17 more times. It's just what happens. And, just the arm around the shoulder, and that kid or whoever it is walks away feeling a lot better about himself. But the sage also helps the veterans too, who also can get down on themselves, and they just need somebody to remind them who they are and go back out there and fight. But the other archetypes are the warrior, who is really, embodies the best of the team. Not necessarily, say again, Big Papi
for us. Yeah,
for sure. The kid who is, comes in, and the rookie, and is so in awe of a big league clubhouse, and oh my God, there's an espresso machine in the dining room, and everything is just awesome. And what the kid does for everybody else is remind them, yeah, this is pretty awesome. They remember they used to be that way, and it infuses this great energy into the clubhouse. There's the buddy, nobody eats alone. He's the guy who's just like, come on, sit down over here. We're all going to go to the movies. You're coming, whether you like it or not. The spark plug, which for the Giants during their World Series years was Hunter Pence, with the, if people remember, doing the chant and throwing up the sunflower seeds in the dugout, and, just getting everybody just jazzed in that moment. The jester, who I think can be the most powerful archetype, because a jester can say anything and do anything and wrap it in humor, and it lands well. So you can really get on a teammate, but it's delivered in a way that says, you screwed up and you're still one of us. You're still one of us. So
Kevin
Like,
Millar,
rack together.
Kevin Millar for our team. Kevin Millar.
Totally Kevin Millar.
Yeah.
Totally Kevin Millar. Oh, absolutely. He's a jester with the capital J. And then the enforcer. And the enforcer is a tough role to play because you set yourself up to be disliked because you're the one that holds people accountable. We don't do it that way at the Red Sox. We don't do it that way at the Giants. And you better run out the ground ball and really can get in somebody's face. And his teammates may say, God, he's a jerk, but he's right. And he had the cojones to stand up and say it.
I think we needed an enforcer after the World Series to tell Justin Turner, who was heart and soul of that team, that maybe it wasn't such a great idea to join the celebration on the field after testing positive for the virus. But I digress. Joni, we could talk all night. You know we could. But I'll try to end it here before we take questions from the audience. And I look at the Q&A function and it's blowing up.
Great.
You know, we've talked about team chemistry and how it matters in sports and in the military. But in our own workplaces, what relevance does team chemistry have?
Well, it does. You have to first have a trusting culture in order for team chemistry to thrive. And that takes great leadership. That yes, the players, the workforce should be an island. They should be a just us group, but it takes leadership to create the culture in which that can thrive. And workmates need to be able to trust each other. And one reason is that if you feel trusted and you do trust your workmates and you trust your bosses, you can take risks. And that's how we elevate our performance. If we just stay like this, we're never going to get better. That company's never going to go public. We need to push ourselves, and we need to know our bosses and our workmates have our back in order to do that, or else you're never going to take a risk. And also it matters, who the messenger is almost as important as the message. We're not going to listen to workmates or bosses that we don't trust and that we don't respect. We're going to be like, yeah, I don't care. Even if the advice and counsel they gave us was really, really valuable. And if that happens, and actually Brandon McCarthy, the former player, was talking to me about that. He said, if you dismiss that great counsel because you don't trust the messenger, how much great information gets lost? And like on a baseball team, how many wins, how many games might that have cost you because you didn't take that really important advice because you didn't trust the messenger?
So at this point, and Joan, thank you so much. But if you're willing to stick around for a little bit, we do have a few questions. I'm going to invite Rachel Kirby, who's a doctoral candidate at Boston University, was my intern last year with the Red Sox. Hello, Rachel. She's going to act as our moderator for the questions. And Rachel, I assume you probably loaded. So fire away.
Okay, thanks everybody. Yeah, we are over 30 questions at this point. So there's no way we can get through all of these, but I'll do what I can to maybe pull out some themes that cover a few different questions. But just following up on your last points around leadership and the importance of that, we have a lot of people interested in the role of the manager in team chemistry. What can a manager do? Can a manager be a super carrier? Are there examples of managers that come to mind with really great involvement with team chemistry? Things like that.
Well, I don't think a manager cannot be the super carrier. All those archetypes have to come from the players themselves, because at the end of the day, they're driving the bus. It's all about them on the field and what motivation they have, what energy, how much they're willing to do for each other. But leadership is usually important in setting the culture. And a manager has to have almost unquestioning, unconditional acceptance of who his players or her players, and I say his and him, but I mean both genders, has to have unconditional acceptance of who his players actually are, not who he wants them to be. And we think about Phil Jackson with Dennis Rodman. He's not an easy guy to just accept, exactly who he is. But by Phil Jackson accepting what Dennis Rodman contributed to the team in any crazy way he did it, that allowed Dennis Rodman to really flourish. And it also set an example for his teammates to accept who he is. And, somebody like Dave Roberts, we just watched him win the World Series. He tries to connect with every single player on his team every single day, even if it's just like, hey, dude, how are you doing? But he remembers, somebody's dad, landed in the hospital with an infection or something. Like, he really connects. He really shows them that he cares and he knows what's going on in their lives. So yeah, leadership matters on a billion different levels.
Great, thank you. So you mentioned there that the manager is important with team culture. So we had a question about the difference between team chemistry and team culture and how that plays out.
Yeah, team culture is almost like the room. Okay, so you have this, you have this beautiful room, and it's painted in a very calming color, and the furniture is very inviting, all of that, but it's static. The culture is static. Chemistry is active. Chemistry is animates everyone in the room. So if you have this beautiful room in which the party can flourish, right? We're going to have this beautiful dinner party and the surroundings are beautiful. So now we go in there and it's like, well, how are we going to behave in that room? How are we going to interact with each other in that room? So one thing to remember, and this kind of goes to how people use the word camaraderie and cohesion as if it is interchangeable with chemistry. And it isn't, because camaraderie and cohesion, well, cohesion is a state of being and camaraderie is just a fellowship. But chemistry is always active. If the productivity doesn't increase, you don't have team chemistry. You just have, workmates who really like each other and go out to lunch together, but it's not chemistry. And culture is also static. It's the environment in which team chemistry happens.
So thinking about the sort of super disruptor, as you've called it, just how destructive can that character, that role be to a team?
Well, what's really interesting is that I am not sure, by the time I finished the book and really dug deep on Bonds and Kent and super disruptors, I'm not sure, at least in professional sports, you can have a super disruptor. And by that, I mean, like with Bonds, he's so good. He contributed so much to the end result, the goal, which was winning, right? That his teammates can accept him. It's like Steve Jobs. The comparison would be there. Steve Jobs was really difficult to work for, really awful human being a lot of the time in the workplace. But he contributed so much to what that company was all about and what drove that company to succeed that he was accepted. And so I think in professional sports, if you're not a superstar and you're disrupting, you're just gone. You're out of there. They're not going to keep you around. So, but I do think there are disruptors, and the disruptors fall into two categories: malingerers, and that's the guy who, when Clayton Kershaw's on the mound, suddenly he needs a day off. You know, he's not going to be in that batting lineup today. He needs a day off. So that's the malingerer. And also, you know, he may not run out, you know, the ground ball, and he's not going to dive for the ball because he may get injured. You know, like he's not all out. And then the other one is the complainer looking for recruits. And it's often the fading veteran who's trying to hang on, and he's not in the lineup, and he's complaining and telling the other guys, you know, you're getting screwed too. That's a really dangerous person to have in your clubhouse. And managers and front offices need to recognize those guys, and if they can, to get rid of them.
For a point of reference for our Red Sox fans, if you want to observe a clubhouse full of complainers, just go back and look at that 2001 team, which was a terribly dysfunctional ball club, Joan. So yeah. Point well taken.
Yeah, and it is contagious. It is the bad apple syndrome. You know, the one bad apple can, if it's that person and they're charismatic in some way, they can, and you have not a healthy culture. It can't be contagious in a healthy culture, but a culture that isn't healthy, it can just run through the whole clubhouse.
So how can someone identify if their team has a healthy culture or a good chemistry?
Well, here's how you can tell if you have chemistry. We think that, at least I did before I started researching this book, I thought that teams and a workplace where everybody goes out to lunch together, or, you know, they have cocktail Fridays, or they're, you know, have like on a team, you know, like on the base paths during the World Series, we saw a lot of this, you know, those kinds of things. We think, oh God, that's building chemistry. It isn't. It's the evidence of chemistry. They already have the chemistry when you see them doing those behaviors. You know, and I think, Gordon, you were talking about how Big Papi, you know, would have the guys over for dinner. And something like that, maybe for Big Papi, because he was a leader in the clubhouse, maybe he was trying to get something going there. I don't know if it worked. I don't know which teams he was, you know, which versions of which teams he was doing that with. But it is something that people try to do, and it can work, it can't work. But all those other behaviors don't happen unless you already have team chemistry. So when I looked at, you know, the Rays and the Dodgers, man, those guys had team chemistry in spades. Both teams did. It was such a pleasure to watch that World Series.
Rachel, I think I got a sneak preview of some of the questions, and I saw one that was delivered from an 8-year-old in our audience. Can you tee that one up by any chance?
Yeah, that was next on my list. We're on the same page. So 8-year-old and co-host of the Sliders and Curveballs podcast wants to ask, can a team of awesome friends beat a team of great players?
I love that question.
I do too.
We all want to know.
I know. And what is this person's name?
This is Joseph.
Joseph. Love your question, and please invite me to be on your podcast if you take guests. My email is joanryan1@gmail.com. I really want to be on your podcast. And I would say absolutely a team of really good friends can beat a team of all-stars. Now, team chemistry cannot manufacture talent, right? But you can be what team chemistry does is make the absolute most out of the talent you have. And if every single one of your friends is giving 100%, is doing a Jake Peavy on the mound, giving 100%, and you're bringing out even that little extra you didn't even know you had, which is what friends do to each other. Oh yeah, you can beat that team. My money's on you, Joseph.
Love it. I think, Rachel, we have time for a couple more.
Okay. They keep coming in too. Well, I'm glad to hear that great friends can beat great players. That's always good. Are there some common characteristics or traits that you can identify across super carriers, like emotional intelligence, high empathy, things like that?
Yes, all of the above. And generally, super carriers are not great players. And they grew up, and like Jonny Gomes, and I bet David Ross, very similar. They grew up just loving to be part of a team. Like for Jonny Gomes, he grew up in a broken home, didn't have much money. And his team, when he put on that uniform for the first time, it didn't matter. Like at school, sometimes he'd get made fun of for his clothes, because he didn't have the, the Nikes or whatever. Once he put on that uniform, everybody was the same. And it meant you belonged to each other. And that never left him. And those are the super carriers. Those are the guys that will do anything for their teammates. And one thing Jonny Gomes would do if he saw a teammate struggling at the plate, Jonny Gomes on his own would go to the video room and watch the guy's last 50 at bats and say, hey, I noticed you're doing something a little different here. And again, it's that messenger delivering the news. Everybody will listen to Jonny Gomes because they assume good intent, right? So, and also a super carrier is often, and I mentioned this before, all 7 archetypes. They have the enthusiasm of the kid, the wisdom of the sage, the accountability of calling people out, again, because he knows people will listen to him. He may not be the jester, that's kind of a very specific thing. Definitely a spark plug, maybe even with individual players. And they have the time to give and the energy to give. If you're a superstar, you're working on your craft day in, day out, every moment, because you can't stay that great. But somebody like Jonny Gomes, his value is in helping everybody around him.
Maybe one more, Rachel?
Okay, so we've had a few questions about different time periods that maybe foster or discourage team chemistry, thinking about the Boston Strong team, teams rallying together after 9/11. But then on the flip side, a team in this current political moment, if they're not sort of unilaterally supporting the Black Lives Matter, does that impact, how do you see the sort of larger political or social situations impacting team chemistry?
Yeah, I paid pretty close attention to that because I found it fascinating. And, again, I work for the Giants. So on opening day, all the players knelt except one. And so the question was going to be, well, how were all those players going to feel about the one player when in the clubhouse they felt they were all on board, right? And the one player didn't join. And it didn't divide that clubhouse, partly because it was just one person. But in fact, the Black Lives Matter, I think team after team after team, it was so uplifting to watch everybody coming together. I mean, the Giants at that time had one Black player on the team, and everybody was right there alongside him. And they were alongside each other because they know it's, this is about all of us. It's not about Black players. It's about all of us being together. And I just thought the demonstration that I think just any team I saw anyway on opening day, it gave them an opportunity to show we have each other's backs. We are in this together. It is just us, and we don't care what anybody else thinks. So I loved it. I thought it was really kind of a playing out of a version of team chemistry. Again, that evidence, if they didn't have team chemistry right at that moment, they were on their way.
Rachel, thank you very much. Joan, I cannot tell you what an absolute joy and privilege this last hour has been to have this conversation with you. The book, if you haven't gotten it already, is Intangibles, Unlocking the Science and Soul of Team Chemistry. You can go to fenwayparkwriters.org to order it, or go to your own bookstore, go online. Go ahead, Joan.
I have one thing. Because we can't be in person and I can't sign books, what I encourage you to do if you buy the book, to email me at joanryan1@gmail.com with your physical address, and I will sign a book plate for you and send it to your home, and you can put it inside the book. And I do want to let you know, these make great Christmas gifts.
Yeah.
And there's never too early to start thinking about Christmas.
Yeah. You're unbelievable. Thank you. That's so generous of you. Everyone, thank you so much for your attention. I'm happy to announce that our next event, I don't know how it can possibly top this one, but we're going to do something special. The great Louis Tiant turns 80 next month. El Tiante. So we're going to do a combination examination and presentation of his book and a book about another Cuban-American star, a woman, Lefty Alvarez. But in the midst of that, we are going to be celebrating El Tiante's birthday. Louis will be with us. We're going to have a star-studded cast of folks wishing him birthday greetings. So by all means, if you go to our webpage tonight, you can even be among the first to register. Again, Joan Ryan, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much. You know we'd be on our feet applauding if it was in person. But
Thank you so much, Gordon. Thank you for the invitation, and it was just a blast. Let's do it again.
There you go. Good night, everyone. Thank you so much.
Bye, everyone.